Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and in today's video, I'm back in Austin, Texas at Texas Traditions, visiting with legendary bootmaker Lee Miller. In the last episode of our series documenting the construction of my cowboy boots by famous bootmaker Lee Miller, we saw Lee crafting one of the most distinctive features of a Western cowboy boot, the toe box. This is one of the most iconic elements of a cowboy boot, so it has to be perfect. Now that Lee has sculpted the toe shape of my boots, it's time to move on with the process of lasting the boot and beginning to hand sew them together. This process has largely remained unchanged for over 100 years. So join me as we step back into Lee's workshop to see this incredible craft practiced at the highest level.
So I'm using some of the machinery to help me just do some bulk sanding, and then I'm going to be going ahead and just doing the rest of it by hand. I've got a center line drawn just as a visual aid, and now I'm going to go ahead and start using this old vintage World War II machine. This will help me. I'll check every side profile from this angle, looking for any high spots, and I can mark them with a pencil, and then I can literally focus on those high spots. And it's just continually focusing. I can see the color change. Here it's very light colored, here it's very dark. The reason is that this is thin here and this is thick here. So I have to do a little bit more effort to go ahead and to clean this shape up. It's not quite ready yet. But I can watch the color change and realize where I'm at in terms of thickness, keeping it strong. I want it to be very thin here. I want it to be fairly thick here. And so by focusing on the color, you can see that happening. But it will be just because I've got a little bit thicker toe box than normal. Normal would be 1.5 millimeters. Mine is a little bit thicker than that. I'm having to do a little bit more work to get it to the shape that I want, but it's going to be prettier as a result. So having that little bit of thickness makes you work harder, but at the same time you get a nicer end result. So I want a beautifully refined toe, and this will give me the ability to do that. This is a tool from Central America that would be used for the same reason. So you have a slicking tool like a maple stick, or this tool here that would fit in the palm of your hand. And they're both used for the same purpose, to slick the toe box, compress the fibers, and further refine the shape. But once I can see that I'm done, looking at the toe box from all angles, and then using a contour gauge to check the shape. The interesting thing about a contour gauge is when you flip it, you can see the mirror image of it. And in seeing the mirror image of the toe shape, you can see any imperfections in it. So having a reverse visual, you can see where you need to focus. So I can see where I need to focus, which is right here. So the contour gauge, just looking at it from the reverse image, shows me that I need to take a little bit more off here just to get the nice shape that I want. So the interesting thing about the contour gauge is literally you can see a left and a right, and in doing so, by flipping it and seeing the mirror image of the toe, it reveals any imperfections in the silhouette. And right here where my index finger shows is a slight wrong shape. The shape is slightly off, which would correspond to right here. So I'm going to focus a little bit more right in that area. Then I'll go ahead and take another shape and just look at it in the reverse image. But it's very, very close at this point. Also, an interesting aspect of all of this, which I've never seen anybody really discuss before, is just by looking at it from the bottom, you can also see the same thing, which is it's off just a little bit right here. So the bottom reveals the same thing as the contour gauge. The nice thing about leather is this is a cowboy boot. I obviously want the toe to be just as strong for a work boot as I would for a dress boot. So it's the same exact method for both. And so the boot is meant to be worn. It's probably a little bit more work than most people would put into a leather toe box, but it just gives me the ability to do a beautiful shape. And honestly, that's what I care about, is a beautiful shape. I don't want the toe to be ugly. And if you've ever seen an ugly toe, well, that's when you look at your boots, that's the first thing you see is the toe. And you want it to be beautiful. Super beautiful, super refined, super elegant. It has a striking look to it. There's no clumsiness to it. It's just very elegant and very pretty, nice lines. And when you look at your boots, that's what you see. You see the toe. They talk about a table look in anything. So the first impressions of the customer, you want them to just be wowed by it. So obviously the more time you spend making it look beautiful, the better end result. So I can get a better view of what it'll look like by bringing the vamp around and looking at it. And it's a nice toe. So after shaping the toe box, now I've got to go ahead and pull around the vamp. We call that swiping in the vamp. So I'm going to be using, this is alcohol and water. And I want to go ahead and moisten it, but I'm going to do it on the outside. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just spritz it. Rub it in. And we're going to drape this back. And once again, I'm going to be using this product, Hirschkleber. This paste is a wonderful paste made in Germany. And it's a hardener and an adhesive. And it's non-toxic. So a light coat. I don't want to get any on the boots, so I'll be careful about that. I'm starting once again with the widest foot, which is the right in this instance. Okay. So this smooth ostrich, this is an interesting use of a helper. This string technique is just something that I learned from an old Mexican bootmaker. And it acts so swiftly to help me pull everything in. So I've got the string on there. I'm using it. And then I can fine-tune it and it won't slip. So different people use different methods. The old bootmakers would use a wire instead of a string, but a string is just as effective and it won't scratch the leather. So this is where I am, but it's not done yet. Now I've got to fine-tune it. And I can further refine the shape. I can compress it. That's the beauty of leather, is you can compress it. And so I can just make the shape even more beautiful just by how much. The nice thing, if you notice something, I have different pliers. This is a big Swedish plier. This is a small German plier. The bigger the plier, the more leverage. The smaller the plier, you can do more detailed work with it. So if I was in a tight corner, obviously I wouldn't use a big plier, I would use something small. But this gives me lots of leverage. If I want to pull it in a little bit more on one side, I can use a bigger plier. So you can go back and forth in your tool selection depending on what you need to do. So it's just minute little changes that you're making. Now I've got to go ahead and clean this up. And so if you were to think about all the hand sewing that I'm going to do, I'm going to be coming in about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I can see the edge. So now what I'm doing is I'm placing tacks 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And those will be my guide points for my hand sewing. So you can see just make sure you stay 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now restring it. There we go. And this is going to be the sewing line. And so remember, this is an old method where they might have used wire as opposed to string. They both work. The string is not going to scratch the leather. The wire might. And then, of course, string is inexpensive and plentiful. So now, let's take a look at it. Okay. And this is where you can assess it and determine if there's anything you're not happy with, and you can go ahead and you can minutely change it. So I'm going to go ahead and right there put a little bit more pressure on it to clean up the shape a little bit more. And I've established now my sewing line. We can trim all this excess, which we don't need anymore. And a few more nails here. Now I have my sewing line. So when I inseam or welt, it'll be nice and level and straight and beautiful. So this is what I have so far. And then the final thing is use of the hammer. No matter where you go in the world, no matter if it's a shoemaker or a bootmaker, they're all going to be doing the same thing, using the hammer to just refine the shape, to compress the leather and give it a good appearance. And you just need a clean hammer. All of these nails, every nail will come out. These will come out, these will come out, every nail. This will all be sewn from the heel seat, and the shank will all be hand sewn in one operation. And the second operation will be sewing the forepart, welting. Every nail you see will be removed, and everything will be hand sewn. So these nails here along the outside edge are just simply guideposts showing me where to sew. They're 1/8 of an inch from the edge. The inner nails are just holding it down tightly. So I want to go ahead and I want to make sure that I don't have any wrinkles or any excess leather. And so if you notice, I'm just kind of running my thumb over it just to make sure that it's tight. Because if I don't pull it tight enough, why then it'll wrinkle. So now comes the real test of putting them on the floor and looking at them side to side and ask yourself, are they a nice match? And at this point, you can give it a few taps, and I think we've got a nice shape. Right there. Let's see, right there. There we go. So I'm going to be using a synthetic pre-made hand thread, and these are made in Maine, and if you notice, the end is already tapered. And you can buy these in different lengths and different thicknesses. So this I'm going to use to go ahead and to hand sew the shank and the heel seat. And then I've got some sticky wax that was made by an old bootmaker in northern Texas. And this is what we'll be applying to the hand thread. When I was working for Charlie, we made all of our own hand threads out of flax. And it would be 9 strands for a man and 7 strands for a woman. And even when we would sew the toes, which we do, a leather toe box has a sewn toe on certain shapes, we would go ahead and make a hand thread for that. It would be four strands of flax to make a hand thread. But in 1986, I decided I was going to go ahead and switch to a synthetic hand thread. The flax, the one negative about flax being an organic material is it will rot. And what we were finding was that our boots were coming back in, and the hand threads, the flax welt, hand strings, hand threads had broken because they were rotting. And so that was moisture. So with a synthetic hand thread, you're not going to get that. A cowboy boot is meant to be worn and worn hard. and different than a dress shoe. So a dress shoe is much more refined, and you can use more refined techniques making a dress shoe. But if I use those same techniques on a cowboy boot, it might not hold up. So I've got to make the cowboy boot to whether it's a dress boot or a boot that someone's going to work in, it's got to be made using the same methods. It's got to hold up. And so that's why the synthetic is just a better use for a cowboy boot. It would work fine on a dress shoe, but it doesn't necessarily, I don't think a dress shoe would have the same level of abuse as a cowboy boot. And so I want to make a boot that's going to hold up, that isn't going to come back with a faulty stitch. You know, I mean, I get boots here that were made in 1978 that come back, and they're still in good shape. And so, yeah, we routinely fix everything we make. But the hand thread being synthetic, it just makes it a little bit, it'll hold up better to the weather. So this is the equivalent of 9 strands of flax. And I've got a tapered end, and to that tapered end, I'm going to apply a bristle, and rather than using like a boar's bristle, I'm going to go ahead and use a guitar string that we've turned into a bristle. There we go. A little bit of moisture to help do the piercing. This is just water. My goal is to replace all the nails in the boot. I don't want to have any nails in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and whip stitch the shank, sewing the upper to the insole. And then once I get to the heel, I'm going to switch to a different type of stitch. And I'm going to sew the heel seat. And then once I pass the heel seat, I'll go back to whip stitching it in here. So this operation is literally going to go from here to here and end. The forepart will be welted or inseamed. But this sewing the upper to the insole just secures it. I don't want to have any nails in there at all. I want it to all be nice. And hand sewing is much gentler for the foot. Nails will stick up and you might feel them on the inside. And so this is a much nicer way. It's really not hard. And it does a better job of securing it. Absolutely. You've got everything. Everything is being held together at this point by the hand sewing. So you can see I've locked it in. So we're going to be doing a different, like a shoemaker might do a welt from the heel forward, and a cowboy boot is going to have a wooden peg shank. So in that instance, I'm going to secure it this way. And it'll pull it in nice and tight. Tighter than if I did anything else. So just that little bit will cinch it up even tighter. So I'm just skating through the insole halfway. You'll never see it on the inside, and you'll never feel it. It's just halfway through the insole. There we go. That's the beginning. So every nail is pulled and replaced with a stitch. So remember, in a factory boot, they've eliminated all labor. And that's how they save money. Cheapen the materials and remove labor. But This is just a wonderful method. Very simple, not hard to do. Charlie did not teach me how to do this. Charlie would simply cement and wooden peg this. The hand sewing actually came from my student apprentice from Munich, Germany. And he was showing me how they hand sewed the shanks in Germany. And I thought, my goodness, I like that. Now, unbeknownst to me, a lot of the traditional Western bootmakers were doing it that way also. So Charlie didn't. Charlie would wooden peg this area. But I like the hand sewing better because I can tell that it tightens it up even more. If I don't hand sew it, then I will go ahead and get a little bit of bagginess. And I don't want any bagginess. There we go. So now I'm going to transition to a different stitch. This stitch is really wonderful. This stitch that I'm starting to use here, it's just a delightful stitch, very simple. I had a guy here from Paris who showed me this, only he was using 2 needles, or 2 bristles. This is a whip stitch, which is a very simple stitch. This has a little lock put in it, see? And what it does is it draws it, and then it locks it right there, see? It pulls it in. So it's just a prettier stitch. There's different names for it, for the stitch. You might see it in print being referred to as the forgotten stitch. You might also see it in print referred to as the royal stitch. There's different names for it, but it's just a different. I wouldn't use this stitch in the shank, but I would use it in the heel seat because the heel seat is nice and flat, and it just pulls it in and locks it. So you can see, there it is. So the thread has a little twist in it, which it does not have here. And that literally came from my friend in Paris, who's back in Paris now working, making shoes. And he showed it to me, and he learned how to make shoes in France from this this company that still exists today to train people in the old arts. Part of boot and shoemaking is the lore, and this is just part of the lore. And that's what people like so much about the trade. Just all these little tiny things that make up what they do. Now back to a simple whip stitch. No knot. There we go. So, change. Imagine when you're cinching a saddle up on a horse, it just pulls it in just a little bit tighter. Whereas in the heel seat, I don't really want that. I want that, plus I want to lock it in place. So they're just a little bit different. This is just a simple stitch. A whip stitch is just, you can see it doing its magic, but I don't need to lock it in place as I would in the heel seat. So you can see it actually, if you slow down, you can see it pulling it in right there, just a little bit. So there'll be no bagginess in the waist. It'll be nice and tight. So I'm almost done with this. I have maybe 2 more stitches to do. And let's see. This will be nice and tight. Let's do one more. Okay. Now let's tie it up. This is the end. And again. So these nails are now being removed. They no longer serve a purpose. So at this point, this has all been hand sewn, and the only nails left are in the forepart, here and here, and then all in here. These will all be taken out in the inseaming, the welting. And that's how it came to be. And so the cowboy boot is a combination of those things. The European influence and the Central America and Mexican influence. And so you can also, let's just say you want to have your jeans stacked the way George Strait does. If you have a spur rand or a spur shelf, the jeans will just rest on it. So the big hole is on the inside, the little hole is on the outside, and that's where the water would come in.
Yeah.
So really keep that as small as possible.
Helping to further waterproof the boots.
Exactly, yeah.